The Altitude 3550 Access Point. The Altitude 3550 Access Point has all the features described in the Altitude 3500 Series Access Point Overview, as well as some features that are unique to this model. First, this access point is designed for outdoor use. It has weatherized connectors, and the unit has a weather rating of IP56 and NEMA 4X. It can operate in temperatures from minus 30 degrees Celsius to 55 degrees Celsius, or minus 11 to 131 degrees Fahrenheit. The Altitude 3550 access point is not C1D2 rated for hazardous environments. The Altitude 3550 AP is available in two versions or SKUs, the 3550-US for deployment in the United States only, and the 3550 ROW for deployment in the rest of the world except Israel. The Altitude 3550 AP has 4 LEDs to indicate the status of the unit. The LEDs identify if the unit is powered, if an error condition has occurred, or if there is activity on any of the network ports or radios. The Altitude 3550 access point has 4 mounting holes that allow the unit to be easily attached to a wall or a pole. When deploying an Altitude 3550 AP, there are a number of things to put into the equation. Start with the Altitude 3550 outdoor access point. Next, add a power source for the AP. If deploying outdoors, the power tap power supply must be used. The part number for the power tap is 15729. If deploying indoors, the Motorola mid-span power injector should be used. After specifying the power source, add some antennas. The Altitude 3550 outdoor AP does not ship with any antennas, so the network administrator should review the Altitude 3500 and 4600 AP antenna selection guide and order the antennas appropriate for their application. Next, depending upon where the AP is being deployed, wall mount or pole mount hardware is required. The wall and pole mounting kits can be ordered using part number 15733. The final part of the equation is the optional heavy weather kit for use in environments with high winds and debris, like sand. The part number for this kit is 15732. The back panel of the Altitude 3550 access point has a number of components that enable the device to easily be managed and integrated into the network. Please click on one of the component areas to learn more about the unit's features. The 3550 access point has an RJ45 serial cable port to enable the network administrator to manage the device out of band. The console port has the default settings of 19.2 kbps, 8 data bits, 1 stop bit, no parity, no flow control. The serial port of the Altitude 3550 uses the same cable as the WM3000 series WLAN controllers. Refer to the documentation for cable pinouts. The LAN port on the 3550 access point is a 10100 Power over Ethernet port. You must provide power to the AP through this port, as there is no connector for an optional power supply. You may use a power tap, extreme part number 15729, to power the AP if you are deploying this device outdoors. If you are deploying the AP indoors, you may use Motorola's AP PSBIAS-1P2 AFR inline power injector to power this AP. The power tap and power injector are the only two supported methods of powering this AP. The 3550 access point has a 10100 non-PoE Ethernet WAN port. This port may be used as an uplink port. The 3550 AP has 4 antenna ports. The highlighted area shows the antenna ports for radio 1. For spatial diversity, there are 2 antenna ports per frequency band, 2.4 GHz or 5 GHz on the AP3550. These 2 outer antenna ports, labeled radio 1, are configured to transmit and receive on the 2.4 GHz band, or 802.11b and g. The antenna port labeled with a single dot identifies the primary antenna port. The antenna port labeled with 2 dots identifies the secondary antenna port. This distinction is important when configuring antenna diversity. Diversity can be configured to full diversity for 2 antennas, primary only when using a single antenna on the primary port, or secondary only when using a single antenna on the secondary port. Extreme Networks recommends using 2 diversity antennas per band for best performance. If only 1 antenna is used, the unused radio 1 antenna port must be terminated with a 50 ohm RF terminator to ensure proper performance of the internal RF switch. The 3550AP has up to 4 antenna ports. The highlighted area shows the antenna ports for radio 2. For spatial diversity, there are 2 antenna ports per frequency band, 2.4 GHz or 5 GHz on the AP3550. These 2 inner antenna ports, labeled radio 2, are configured to transmit and receive on the 5 GHz band, or 802.11a. The antenna port labeled with a single dot is the primary antenna port. The antenna port labeled with 2 dots is the secondary antenna port. This distinction is important when configuring antenna diversity. Diversity can be configured to full diversity for 2 antennas, primary only when using a single antenna on the primary port, or secondary only when using a single antenna on the secondary port. Extreme Networks recommends using 2 diversity antennas per band for best performance. If only 1 antenna is used, the unused radio 2 antenna port must be terminated with a 50 ohm RF terminator to ensure proper performance of the internal RF switch.